Welcome to Voices in the River. It's a show about how we reclaim power through intuition, magic, and community. I'm Rebecca Allman, your pragmatic, devoted witch. I'm so excited because our guest today is Rachel Khong. So when our producer, Theo Balcomb, heard Rachel Khong on another interview, she immediately contacted me and said, the way she presents her craft is so humble and beautiful. We must interview her. And we are so delighted today to share Rachel's curiosity, her creativity, and her craft with you. She is the award-winning author of Goodbye Vitamin, and her new book, Real Americans, is about 3 different generations, and it asks the question, what makes us who we are, and how inevitable are our futures? And it's a book about science. It's also a book about magic. So Rachel and I had our conversation in the fall of 2024. We talked about prayer, we talked about ancestors, and I can't wait for you to hear this conversation. And I'm going to light a candle. I picked a red candle for you.
Oh, beautiful.
Okay, so I'm going to shuffle the cards. So just notice your feet on the floor and notice your heart space. Okay, so you got the Rainmaker.
Whoa.
All right, let's read it and see what it says. Ooh, I love this. Do you have a new project?
I do have a new project.
Okay, so I'm asking because I think this applies to that. So the Rainmaker is the master of manifestation, who can call on the elements of nature to serve the greater good. When the power to co-create is used with integrity, great beauty and benefit flow to all. When this power is used for personal gain only, everyone suffers. So this is the invitation. The Rainmaker is calling you to create something new from the elements that are already in your life. Be sure you work with what is and not with what might be or could have been. The seeds that have been silently germinating in your heart will burst forth, ready for the sunlight. Do not hold back. Put all your chips on the next roll of the divine dice.
Wow.
So tell me, if you can, why you think you got the Rainmaker.
Wow. I mean, I love that so much. I am working on a new project. I think I am someone inclined to dwell in the past or in the future. And sometimes it's a little bit of a struggle to remain in the present. There's sort of this like daydreamy, wanting to jump ahead. And yeah, that really, really resonates. Another thing that really resonated was, I used to actually feel like really kind of terrified of doing podcasts for some reason. I mean, podcasts, but like any kind of interview really, because, I went into writing because I felt that I could communicate sort of more perfectly in the written word. And I sort of struggled with, just like verbal communication when I was growing up, especially as a kid and a child from an immigrant family. And I think what helped me get past that fear a little bit was I started writing down these prayers almost. A lot of them were about just wanting whatever I said to be a benefit to somebody else. I think the reason I was so afraid was because I was sort of wrapped up in how I came across or like my own sort of capabilities when it came to saying what I meant. And I think that when I was able to reorient toward, okay, what might I be able to say that, it's not even about like what I say, it's more about like maybe this is necessary for somebody out there. Maybe somebody listening will find something valuable in what I say, or not even valuable, but just like interesting or funny or anything, right? Like it's not for me, it's for sort of the good of other people.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Well, and I love that. So our podcast is called Voices in the River because a friend of me said, "Why don't you just put some women's voices in the river and see what happens?" And it's like, yeah, you don't know, but it might be an opening for someone.
Yeah, exactly.
So, would you say a little bit more about prayer and how you use it or work with it?
Well, I actually grew up in a very religious family. My parents are still very religious. They're Christian. We went to a Baptist church, and prayer was very much a regular part of my life.
Mhm.
And it was very much about gratitude, of course. It was like, thank you for
Right.
this meal and things like that. But it was also asking for things, right?
Right.
And I don't go to church anymore. I've fallen away from all of that. And, just hadn't prayed in years, maybe a decade even, because I had this sort of discomfort maybe with that asking part,
Mhm.
it didn't feel quite right to me because I think that I want to be in this sort of collaboration
Yeah,
with.
it's a difference between transaction and transformation.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes Christian prayers are transactional,
Exactly.
and I feel like spiritual prayers are transformational.
Exactly. Yeah, and I
Yeah.
just hated this sort of ATM feeling, right? Of like withdrawing from
Yeah.
the God
Oh,
ATM
wow.
or whatever.
Uh-huh.
And this year has been a lot. The book came out, and releasing a book, it's just a very disorienting and sort of at times out of body experience, right? It's this work that is so personal that, I had been engaged in for 6.5 years essentially, right? And working on almost
Mhm.
every day. Very few people had seen it. All of a sudden it was being sent out. Other people were reading it, having thoughts and opinions of their own, right? And it just felt very out of control. And yeah, just one day I typed out a prayer, and I felt like I put prayer in quotes. Even I put like God in quotes. I
Mhm.
put everything in quotes. Like I didn't know quite
Mhm.
what I was doing. I was just trying to surrender some of the control, the total, I had total control over this book and over this thing that I had
Mhm.
made. It felt like it was entirely mine. And I was moving into this period in which it wasn't mine at all. And people could believe whatever they wanted to believe about it. And I just wanted to surrender, that fear.
Mm.
And so I typed out this prayer that just said like, yeah, I'm not asking for anything. I don't want to say like, here's what I want from this publication.
Right.
It was more, I'm ready to be changed by this,
Oh.
and I'm ready to feel different. I mean, whatever form that takes.
Mhm.
And also, sort of confessing like, I don't necessarily feel that prepared for this either. Like, I
Right.
don't feel like capable of doing this, but like, hey, if you could help out, if you could
Right.
just like, yeah, just be in collaboration with me on this. Because, I've written this thing in collaboration as well, right? Like it's a thing that I wrote, but it's was fully also came from somewhere else. It was a story that I felt
Mhm.
needed to be told. It was a story that, I wished that I had, right? For
Mhm.
myself growing up.
Right.
And so, I think during publication season, I was feeling so much responsibility, like overly so. I felt responsible for everybody's opinion of the book. I felt like, like a gremlin, like when they get wet, they like burst out into all the little gremlins. Like that was how I was feeling at the time. And I realized, like, no, like this is not, I did my job actually, and I can just be my one body. I can only just be myself and be present where I need to. I don't know. It's almost like I need to remind myself, okay, this is not entirely up to me. Can I relinquish some responsibility and control and actually be open to whatever might happen? And more specifically, to ask for that, right? To ask,
Mhm.
like, to ask for this change and transformation and to ask to be of service, essentially.
Well, and I don't hear that you actually are asking, but allowing, because you
Yeah.
said, "I'm ready to be changed by this."
Yeah. It's allowing, but it's also just, I mean, it is communicating, I think, this hope for connection or something, right? Like
Yeah.
a sort of desire for
Yeah,
communion.
I think prayer can be intention, it can be wishing on a star,
Hmm.
it can be a lot of things. One of my very favorite poems by Mary Oliver is, "It doesn't have to be the blue iris. It could be weeds in a vacant lot or a few small stones."
Mm.
Just pay attention, then patch. A few words together, and don't try to make them elaborate. This isn't a contest, but the doorway into thanks and a silence in which another voice may speak.
I love that. I'm so much more of a weeds versus blue iris
I'm a
person.
rocks and weeds and sticks.
Yeah.
So you said asking for support, and it just made me from whom? When you pray, to whom or what are you praying?
I have to say, I don't really know anymore.
Yeah, I pray to the great mystery.
Yeah, I think that's the same. I pray to just like the mystery, I think when I started typing these prayers out, I did put God in quotes because I don't think it's exactly the Christian God that I grew up with, right? It's not the sort of like bearded authoritarian, all-knowing situation.
I pray to the ancient witch. There's no guy anywhere.
Yeah, I think for me
with a white beard.
Yeah, no. And I think that was scary for me at first, right? Like being so indoctrinated as a kid, it was like almost like, is this okay? Can I do this?
I know when I went to seminary and they told me that the God was within, I thought, oh my God, I'm going to be struck by lightning.
Exactly.
So one of the themes that I loved in The Real Americans was the undercurrent of people becoming themselves. And I'm curious about how you became yourself. Who are you and how did you become yourself?
Just the biggest
question
possible.
Start. Yeah. You can pass.
No. I mean, I think that question is so interesting. I've been thinking a lot about this question of why am I a writer? And I've often wondered if my parents hadn't come to America. We came when I was 2 years old from Malaysia. If they hadn't come, would I be a writer? And I have no idea. I think that I wonder if I became a writer because I was this, shy kid who went to the library a lot and found so much companionship and solace in books. And I found that I could, really work on a sentence, really try to figure out what I wanted to say within that sentence. And that's what sort of brought me to writing, just wanting to have a deeper conversation than I felt that I could have in person with other people, especially with the people I was around.
Right.
I've been thinking a lot about this lately, actually, that a book is sort of the deepest conversation I get to have with another human being. It's strangely delayed because I'm having the deep conversation when I'm working on it with myself. And then the hope is that the book finds readers. But the readers, the conversation that we can have in person is never quite as deep as the one that you can have just like on your own, right? Like I've felt this so many times when, I've approached a writer that I just really love, and their work has meant so much to me. And really the only thing I can say is, oh my God, I love your books. And that feels so insufficient for what the books have actually meant to me. They've sort of changed me on this like cellular level. And there's no way of really expressing that because the communion happens individually.
Right. So I have done a bit of studying with shaman who live in the Andes in Ecuador and Peru. And one of their beliefs is that time is not linear, that time is vertical, and that past, present, and future are all the same. And I'm curious, when you are writing or the words start to tap you on the shoulder, do you have a sense it's coming from somewhere else?
I want to hear so much more about this past, present, and future verticality because that sounds so fascinating.
Well, I wondered if you had studied it because also in that is ancestral healing. And that if you can go back and do ancestral healing with the past, then you're also healing the future.
Absolutely. I mean, I we need to talk so much more about this because that's so fascinating. Like we know that we carry so many pasts with us, like in our DNA, right? Like who we are is because of the people who have come before us are, right? And there's a lot of trauma and hurt that comes with us that we're not even fully aware of, right? It's just been sort of passed down.
Yes.
I think that sometimes I do get that feeling of, the tapping on the shoulder. I get that feeling of, oh, this sentence is just here. And yeah, I don't know. I know where to go with this next one. I think that does sometimes happen. It doesn't always happen. A lot of days are sitting in front of a document and just moving a period around or trying to like delete certain words and see if that unlocks something. It's really intuitive. I love it when I have that feeling of, oh, I have no idea where this came from. It's a little scary too.
Right. It's like, oh, can I trust this? Is this the
Yeah.
real thing or not the
Yeah.
real thing? With intuition, and people often ask me this, how do you hear your intuitive voice different from your task list?
I think that's such a good question. And that's something that I think about constantly. Like, what's the difference between intuition and anxiety?
Yeah. Yeah.
um, and I think the difference is that intuition does come from a calmer place. When you brought us into this podcast and you were asking me to imagine the heart space, I think it comes from that heart space.
Mm.
And I think that it's really hard sometimes to separate intuition from just what we've been told. This cultural conditioning, right? It's like, do I
Yes.
really want this, or have I just been told to want this, by commercials, by these Instagram ads, by what my friends say, because my friends have been steeped in this same conditioning. And so I think that,
Mhm.
I don't know, it's such a hard project to sort of pull yourself out of that. But I do think there's just this rightness when you feel
Mhm.
intuitively that something is right, and the sort of like feeling in your core, in your gut, right?
Yeah, sometimes for me, it's a locking in,
Mm.
and sometimes it's a flow through.
Yeah. Do you feel like, how do you know?
Well, that's why I asked you,
Yeah.
because people ask me, and I'm like, "I don't know, I just know." I think there were times when I doubted it, and now it's really clear. Now I kinda get hit over the head with it, but it was practice,
Yeah.
I had to play with it and hold it lightly.
Yeah. I think it's practice. I think sometimes what is intuitively right can be a little scary
Mhm,
because it threatens your sense of self, maybe, or like this like
mhm,
solidity. And I don't know, I think that our world is so set up for us to feel control in so many arenas, right? Like,
mhm.
we're given the impression that our lives are under control,
Or that we have
that we
control,
have
yeah.
control, exactly. And I think that we just don't. Yeah, I think intuition reminds us of that, right? Like, that life is not so controllable or predictable. It's something else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things I found really inspiring is in, I think it was the acknowledgement. You said, "I want to be less afraid of friends' judgment and more enthralled by their perspectives." And so when you're thinking about control
Mhm.
or intuition even, or even life, it's like, yes, how can we stay in the mystery? How can we be enthralled by perspectives? It feels like you do that. How do you maintain your curiosity? Maintain's not a good word.
Maybe
Cultivate.
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 I think it's really hard because it feels so safe to believe that we know things, and that we know things about other people, that we know things about
Mhm.
the world. Control feels really good, right? It feels really good until it doesn't, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that sentence that you just read. My friend Aku actually was the one who said that to
Oh,
me very
uh-huh.
randomly.
It's just good life
It's
advice,
good
I
life
thought.
advice, and
Yeah.
I remember hearing that and thinking like, I'm gonna remember this forever and hold this close to
Mhm.
me forever, because I think we are trained to be constantly worried about what other people think of us, to just sort of anticipate judgment and try
Mhm.
to, like, sort of steel ourselves or change who we are to anticipate that judgment. But I think I'm just not interested in that anymore, Like, I'm not interested in comparing people. I've been thinking lately about how the end of the year for authors is a little fraught, because it's all
Mm.
these award lists are coming out. There's these best of year lists, like, there's a lot of judgment being made on like what book was the
Mm.
best. I've always thought it's very ridiculous to try to compare books. It's like comparing trees. you wouldn't look at a tree and think this tree is better than this other tree. I mean, you might have a
Mhm.
subjective opinion about that. You might think I resonate more strongly with this tree because I like the shape of the leaves or something, but you can't put a value judgment on a tree. And so I think of books as trees. I think of people
Oh,
as
yeah.
trees, like we're all these exuberant organic expressions, and how can you judge a person except by these like artificial metrics, right? Like there's like this insufficiency to words, right?
Yeah. One of the other things I learned from the shaman in Ecuador is that when you make a prayer, you blow into the rock or the stone
Hmm.
so that there aren't words, but your breath holds the life force of your intention.
Oh, I love that.
And so when you were talking, I was like, oh gosh, what if you blew just your intentions into a stone or a rock or a feather and then just released it? Because sometimes it's just the intention,
Yeah.
even with ourselves.
Well, I think it's both, right? I think you do need the words for as insufficient as they are. You do still need the words, and you do still need to try to communicate as best you can. And I think about that all the time. I think because, my own family, I mentioned I came to America when I was 2, and my parents are from this other culture, and we often struggle to understand each other.
Mhm.
I think not literally, we all speak English, but the sort of cultural ways in which we show love, just how we want to even interact with each other and be with each other
Mhm.
is culturally informed, and that's different too. And I had a language barrier with my grandparents. And
Mhm.
so, given all of these differences, how do we, show love to each other? How do we exist with each other? And that's a question that, I still have.
So, Nick, one of the characters in the book, finds his grandmother,
Hmm.
and their connection is so
Mm,
beautiful, and so it just made me think about, like, are we really connected to our ancestors, and is there a way they can heal us and help us and guide us in a way that maybe our parents can't even?
yeah, I love thinking about that. I think for me personally, my father's mother would often come to stay with us in the summers, and we communicated with each other very haltingly. She
Mhm.
didn't really speak much English, and my Chinese was terrible, and we would try to talk to each other, but we weren't really able to connect very deeply. And now that she is gone, I do find myself thinking about her, and even though we couldn't communicate, like in person, I feel more of a connection to her now, like
Mhm.
I feel that connection that you're talking about, because she was this very interesting and tough lady, and she was a teacher. She raised a bunch of children, but she also fought the Japanese, and she was like part of this
Mhm.
resistance movement in Malaysia against the Japanese and the British, and was a really cool person. And I wish that I had been able to connect with her about those things when she was still alive. But it's strange, like having this feeling that, oh, maybe yeah, she's still with me actually.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things, I believe is that energy doesn't ever die.
Mm-hmm.
And that energy is always with you, and if we're always a current, that sometimes our time on this plane is up,
Mm-hmm.
and then sometimes our wave is down.
Mm-hmm.
Um, gosh, I just had a question float through that I lost, but it was gonna be great. Um, huh, alright, it'll come back.
I love, by the way, that you started the podcast with, just the feet on the floor and the
Oh,
invitation, because I would love if every podcast started that way. So
well, if every meeting
every
started that way.
meeting, yeah.
Yeah. Um, gosh, this was something about ancestral lineage.
I've never really done ancestral work, really. I mean,
Mhm.
I kind of don't know where to begin with that. How are you doing it? How have you done it?
Um, I help people go on journeys, so it's like a meditation,
Hmm.
and you can call your ancestors in. You don't often see their faces,
Hmm.
but usually they bring you something that makes you know that they're yours, and then you ask them questions. And often it's images or a gift that they give you, or sometimes it's just a feeling.
Mhm.
And, you can do that again and again until you feel like your relationship is developed. I
Hmm.
feel like creating a relationship with your ancestors is like creating a relationship with anybody.
I love that.
You're working in the mythic. I mean, who
Yeah.
knows, I think, again, it's like, are you willing to sit in the mystery with something that you can't see
Yeah.
that might unlock something for you?
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, I think I'm definitely gonna try it. I think, for me, more recently, really only in the past couple years, it's been practices of, like, trying to, I don't know, just, like, feel more okay in myself, right?
Mhm.
You talked earlier about the past, the present, the future. One meditation that I've been doing that has been really helpful to me is imagining lots of different me's in the same
Mm.
house.
Oh.
Me at age 5, me at age 8, 12, whatever, because I think I have, as a person, been so oriented toward the future and often ashamed of my past, or ashamed of, things I've done, or ways in which I could have been better, or whatever it is. And I think that meditation of encountering myself and having compassion for, yeah, the angsty teenager or whatever it is, right? The person who didn't know better. Having all of those versions of myself in the same place, and encountering them almost as friends. It's easier to be kind to your friends, isn't it? It's so
Yes,
much
yes.
easier than it is to be kind to yourself. And so I think thinking of them as friends has been
Mhm.
really helpful.
Yeah. I love that meditation. A lot of women of color say to me, we don't know who our
Yeah.
oldest ancestors are
Yeah.
because there's no
There's no
record.
record.
They were a
Hmm.
number. And there's so much trauma. So what are you really asking us to look at?
Yeah.
And yeah, I think it's about more living the questions with your ancestors
Hmm.
than like trying something or figuring it out.
Yeah.
And the thing that I know just from working with a lot of grandmothers, for some reason grandmothers come through to me, is that the quality of the energies of different ancestors from different lifetimes come through like in a
Hmm.
different channel. Like if you had radio channels, they're different channels.
That's so interesting.
So will you talk a little bit about channeling your work?
Yeah, I mean, channeling feels like, honestly, a strong
Okay, we
word
won't say
for.
channeling. What would you say?
No, I don't know. It is sort of channeling. Yeah, I crave that feeling. I love that feeling when it
Mhm.
feels not necessarily easy. Like, I think easy is actually the wrong word. Writers often talk about, like, being in the flow, or, the words just came out and tumbled out one after the other. And I think that sometimes that does happen, but I think there's also a lot of reason to mistrust that tumbling energy, right? Like, sometimes sentences volunteer themselves because they're just cliches, right?
Mm.
And
Oh,
it's coming not from some divine energy, but it's coming from just, like, all the movies you've ever seen and all the books you've ever read, right? Right? It's more about what you've already been sort of propagandized. And so I think that, yeah, it's not necessarily this feeling of ease when I'm receiving something, right? It's more this feeling of maybe, like, truth or something, or just like this really deep feeling of, like, oh, this feels right. This really feels right.
right.
Something that was really interesting with the book itself was that in Lily's section, she wakes up and she's stuck in time. She looks at the clock and it's not moving. And I just knew it had to be that way. I knew that that was something that was happening to her, but I didn't know why. I had no idea
Mhm.
why that was happening. And then it kept happening, and it kept happening for, like, it happened to her son, Nick.
Mhm.
And I just had no idea why that was. And I sort of let it be there through years of drafts, still had no idea what was going on. I kept searching for a scientific explanation of why this was happening to these particular people. But really, it was like years of this. Like, I was so frustrated. I had no idea what was going on. I was like, why is this happening in this book that's about science? And it was truly like years into writing this book that I realized, oh, I think it does have to do with magic, actually. it's magic.
It is magic.
Yeah. And once that happened, once that sort of presented itself to me, it really unlocked the book for me. I can't say where that came from, but I had to just sit with it for so many years. I had to be sort of struggling against it for so many years before I was entitled to the answer, I guess.
Well, and that is kind of what happens to me when ancestors come through. So your description of that time
Yeah.
lapse, when an ancestor comes through for somebody else, yeah, that happens. And so I was so fascinated reading it because I was like, oh, yeah, your vision blurs and time stops, and you can do some other things in that
Yeah.
space.
Yeah. And I think that I had been craving this scientific explanation because the book
Mhm.
was on its surface about science. And when it occurred to me that no, this time stopping had to do with magic, it made so much sense because I think the book is also about everything that we don't know scientifically.
Mhm.
I think the best writers and the best scientists, even though these are professions in which people look to you and they think, oh, those people know something.
Right.
They know something. I trust in the writers and the scientists who know that they don't know anything. That what we know is really just so little and it barely scratches the surface, and there's so much mystery. And that makes it exciting. That's what makes, yeah, the work so interesting.
Oh my gosh, that's so beautiful, Rachel. So, one last question. I wondered if you would share a little bit about your grandmother. Can you say now, when you first made that connection with her after her death, is there a way that she comes through to you or a way that you feel when you feel her presence or remember her?
I think this is still so new to me, actually, and that is why I asked you about how you like to make these connections, because I would like to have more of a practice of
Mm,
trying to connect with her. She had Alzheimer's at the end of her life,
mm,
and she moved back to Malaysia, was in a home, and we really didn't communicate much during that point. And near the end of her life, the Alzheimer's really made her, I think, fixated on certain topics. You know, she was just very like sort of defensive and a little bit paranoid and accusatory. And it wasn't who she had been in life
mhm,
exactly, but of course she had been through so much in life. I'm sure there was a reason that that was happening in particular. She just had a really tough life, you know? And so I think after she died, I don't know, it felt like she was able to, I just had the sense that she was no longer living in that space of like terror
mm,
and fear and the sort of defensiveness that she was feeling in those final years of her life. It felt like,
mhm.
you know, maybe that had lifted. And I can't say that I have, yeah, I don't know. I'm still so new to this, so I don't have a sense of like how to maybe describe what it feels like
Mhm.
um or what exactly even her presence is. But I think that you know, sometimes I look in the mirror and I think like, oh, I see
Yeah.
the ways in which, yeah, as I get older, I'm starting to resemble her even
Yeah, she's part
more.
of the self behind the self.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, and I see exactly what you've been saying about, you know, the grandparent and child connection. Like my parents are both engineers. They didn't understand why anyone would want to become a writer or do anything in the arts. But with my grandmother, I don't know. I feel like she does understand that, you know, or she did
Mhm.
understand it. And even if she didn't get to live it in her own life because of the circumstances she was born into, yeah, I don't know. I feel a sort of encouragement maybe from
Yeah,
her.
she's like, "Tell her I had a big hand in this book."
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh gosh, Rachel, this was so fun. I could talk to you for
I
hours.
know.
All right.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. Yeah.
Voices in the River was created by Theo Balcomb. It's produced with help from Sara McCrea. It has been a pure delight to make this show, and it takes a lot of time and care. I, of course, get support from readings, but Theo is doing this as a labor of love. If you'd like to support our work with a gift of $33, you may go to voicesintheriver.com/33. Thank you so much for your support in all its forms.